Hello and welcome. My name is Dubs Weinblatt. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm the Associate Director of Education and Training for Metro New York for Keshet. I'm thrilled to be back as the co host of Season 2 of Joy and Resilience Jewish LGBTQ Leaders on What Sustains Us. This season, we are proud to partner with Bechol Lashon, an organization whose mission is to strengthen Jewish identity by raising awareness about the ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity of Jewish identity and experience. I'm excited to introduce to you my co host for this season, Anthony Russell.
Hi, my name is Anthony Russell. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm a performer, composer, and writer of music mostly in Yiddish, an essayist in a number of Jewish publications, a cultural advocate and activist, and last but not least, very pleased to be joining Dubs Weinblatt as co-host for Season 2 of Joy and Resilience. As LGBTQ Jewish people, and specifically as Jews of color, oftentimes we need to create our own ways of persevering through tough moments. Surviving and thriving in this world has pushed us to create our own store of unique wisdom about resilience, joy, and community. Each episode, Dubs and I will invite a different LGBTQ Jew of color to join us in a thoughtful conversation about what sustains us and keeps us hopeful in a conversation where we can only speak from our own personal lived experiences.
The Empress Mizrahi, aka Matthew Nouriel, is a drag artist, entertainer, and content creator of Iranian-Jewish descent living in Los Angeles. In recent years, the Empress Mizrahi has been passionately advocating for LGBTQ plus rights and equality within the Iranian-Jewish communities and beyond, including taking on leadership roles with both queer and non-queer organizations such as JDC Entwine and JQ International. Most recently, they came on board with JQ as the new JQ Persian Pride Associate, supporting the efforts of this growing division at the organization. We hope you enjoy.
So, in your work as an LGBTQ activist, and I dare say as the Empress Mizrahi, you are obviously someone who creates for their audiences moments of laughter, fabulousness, and joy. As someone whose work creates joy, what does joy mean for you?
Well, first of all, thank you. That's a very huge compliment within the question, so thank you very much. Joy. For me, what brings me joy right now is seeing the reaction that I get from the work I do, specifically on social media, or whether it be with my any of the initiatives that I'm working on with JQ International, seeing the effect that being myself and living completely in my authenticity as a queer, gender nonconformist, genderqueer, Mizrahi Jew, seeing that the reaction that I get from other kids, whether it be other Mizrahi Jews or Ashkenazi Jews, or even kids that are not Jewish at all. I get a lot of people reaching out to me from Iran, telling me that they're inspired by what I do, or that what I do makes them feel more comfortable in their own skin or less alone. Those are the things that bring me joy, and it's kind of addictive because it just makes me want to keep going and going and going, because I selfishly love how much joy that brings me.
So you giving people joy, in turn, like their joy is comes back to you. It kind of goes around in a circle. That's really beautiful.
100%, yeah.
I'm wondering if you, growing up, had someone like yourself that you could look up to.
I did not. I'm a little bit older than people think I am. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And I grew up in London until I was 14, and then in Los Angeles. So both major metropolitan environments. But when I was growing up, there really was no one. There was Madonna, who was like I feel like the young queers now just don't know, like that was the one person showing queer people in a positive light. Other than that, there was people like Boy George, for example, but Boy George in my household, in my Mizrahi household, was definitely frowned upon and made fun of and so on. So that was kind of like a little bit of hope there, but it wasn't like Boy George was outwardly talking about his queerness. I mean, in fact, he covered it up for many, many years. So there really was no one, and there really was no one who was Mizrahi or Iranian or anybody who looked like me or who came from a similar background to me. In London, it was a very Ashkenazi environment that I grew up in. I went to an Orthodox Ashkenazi school, so there was literally no one, and that's a huge reason why it's so important for me to be visible. Visibility is of the utmost importance to me, because nobody gets to know you exist unless they see you, right? So that's my another one of my biggest goals, is to just be unabashedly visible, put myself out there as much as possible, because the truth of the matter is it does inspire other people who maybe felt as I did or grew up similar to how I did. So yeah, there was no one. There really was no one, and that was hard because I had to navigate it myself. I mean, even once I came out when I was 15 years old, even then there was nobody. Like there was RuPaul at that point, there was Madonna, there was some people around in the 90s, you know, but none of them looked like me, and none of them came from where I came from. So I really had to navigate it myself. And within the Iranian community, anybody that was, I remember one or two people in the Iranian entertainment field, a singer, and I remember a dancer, and they were very queer in their appearance, as in very, very flamboyant gay men. But they weren't respected. They were treated as kind of a joke or a spectacle or an entertainment piece that was not something that's acceptable in your inner circle or in your actual life. You can enjoy them on television or, you know, at somebody's wedding doing a performance, but that was the image that I had. Like that was the message that was being fed to me, is that queer equals a joke or a spectacle. So, and I guess I may be reinforcing that within many people from the culture that I come from as we speak right now. But I feel like the difference between what I do and what they did, and it is not lost on me that time and evolution has a big part to do with this, but I'm saying who I am, I'm showing who I am, I'm speaking about who I am, and I'm vocal about it and visible about it, other than just being, in my case, a drag queen who shows up and looks, you know, like a drag queen.
I mean, the interesting thing about spectacle is that it can be used as a tool of self-realization. And I feel like I see that in your work. It's fascinating for me to see how experiences in your life have gone directly into your work and into the regal personas that you've embodied through your work. Being able to use the phrase survive and tell the tale is impressive, but to be able to fully inhabit all the various facets of who you are while you do it is even more impressive. And I would think that would require an immense amount of resilience. So what does the word resilience mean to you?
Oh my God. Resilience is, first of all, one of my favorite words. I've always admired resilient people. So to be thought of as resilient is such an honor and a compliment. But I am resilient, and I do recognize that in myself. And to me, resilience, I think it's courage, right? Like we look at words like courage and resilience as sort of, what the true definition of those things mean is that you go through the hardship, you go through the fear, you go through all the bullshit, right? And you still survive, and you're still presenting yourself. You might be broken, but you're not broken. You might be scratched, but you're not broken. I don't even know what I'm trying to say here, but I mean, I know what I'm trying to say, but
yeah,
the analogies aren't working for me. Resilience to me means coming out of it on top. You might be scathed, but you're still coming out of it true to yourself and who you are. You're still standing your ground. You might be battered, you might be worn, you might be hurt. And yeah, you actually might be broken, but you're still standing. You're not gonna let any of that stop you from saying what you have to say and being what you want to be and being who you are. And I absolutely love the word resilience. Resilience means all of those things to me. And I think resilience means, again, I want to say strength, but I wish I could articulate this better. When people, for example, people tell me I'm strong all the time. And because people view somebody as strong, they think that you're somehow not sensitive to things or somehow not as easily hurt. Well, I think the truth of the matter is it's the complete opposite. I think if you're courageous, if you're strong, if you're resilient, you're more sensitive, and because you don't become resilient or strong without having to been through some shit, right?
Right.
And while all of this, all the whole sphere of this conversation that we're having right now seems to be hardship, I wouldn't have it any other way. Like there's so much beauty to resilience. I think people that are resilient have been through a lot, and I admire those people more than I would somebody who hasn't.
I always think of vulnerability and sensitivity as being points of strength, right? You have to be very sure about who you are in order to embody those things and to be able to show those things to the world. And that comes from a place of strength. I feel like I see that in you, and I see that in your work as well.
Thank you very much. It's a huge compliment to me. And you're absolutely right. They are strengths. They're not weaknesses at all. And I think that the consciousness is beginning to shift to some degree, with people taking that into consideration. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can point to moments, I'm almost thinking of this as like a pandemic like shift of like, are there moments leading up to the pandemic? Let me back up and say, are there things that have filled your resilience well before the pandemic that have helped you move through the pandemic?
Is there an easier way to explain that? I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. I'm just trying to think of, like, to me, when I think of resilience, I think of kind of like building tools and adding tools to our toolbox to be able to continuously get through those hard moments, and building those muscles. So I'm curious if there are moments in your life, like pre-pandemic, that maybe prepared you to having to live through a pandemic and prepared you to be resilient in that way.
My answer is probably going to disappoint you. The truth of the matter is I was built to live through a pandemic because I'm so not a social person. So they were like, stay home, don't go to work. I was like, this is fantastic. But with that said, a year into this, there are moments where it gets to be a little bit, you do need resilience to kind of, like mental resilience to kind of put up with the fact that there are times when I'm like, holy shit, I haven't seen anyone in 3 weeks, and that can get a little bit challenging because you can go crazy and, within 4 walls. So I'm thankful for my therapist, and that's a tool that I learned from a very young age is beneficial, therapy. So yeah, I don't know.
That's great. I want to back up a little bit and ask you how you got into drag and what drew you to drag, and what is it about drag that empowers you?
That's a great question. So initially, I think I was born in drag. Like I was attracted to femininity, not in a sexual way, from as long as I can remember, from the moment I was born. I remember being 4 or 5 years old and throwing a temper tantrum because I wanted a Barbie doll, right? I started doing drag when I was about 15, and because of RuPaul, because I'd never seen that before. RuPaul was the first person that I'd seen where it's like I could point to somebody and go, oh, that's what this makes, okay, I make sense now. That's what I want to do. And I only did it for maybe a year tops, because we were already in Los Angeles at that point, and the Iranian-Jewish community here in Los Angeles is very homogenized and very insulated. And people were talking, and my mother's family was, when I say family in an Iranian setting, you're not talking about just your immediate family. You're talking about extended, like third cousin twice removed kind of bullshit. These are all considered family. So it's a massive tribe of people, and it just did not sit well. I'd already come out, and it wasn't gonna work. So I was like, let me put it away. I can't put away, my sexual orientation, but I can put away how I dress. So after a year, I stopped doing it, and I didn't do it again for 20 something years, probably, until I was in my mid to late 30s. And I was doing stand-up comedy at the time. And a friend of mine was like, this is getting to be convoluted, but basically I fell into it through doing a comedy skit, and gradually through this comedy skit, I built a character that was comedic, and I was still going, well, I'm not a drag queen, I'm just a comedian and an actor playing this funny character. And then that got to the point where I'm like, okay, wait a minute, you're only playing this character now, you're not doing any other kind of comedy or acting, and you really enjoy being in drag. So what does that make you? And I had to be honest with myself and say, you know what, I don't want to be a clown. I want to be pretty. I want to wear hair and makeup and express what is within me to express. So drag for me is evolutionary. Like, it keeps evolving, and I keep learning. And I keep learning. When I say learning, I'm learning about myself. And more recently, it's forced me to kind of ask questions about who am I? What is my gender identity? Am I even a drag queen? I find myself asking all the time, because I'm like, I don't want to be in a bar or club every night. I don't particularly enjoy lip syncing. I can barely walk, much less like do a death drop in heels. So it's forced me to ask a lot of questions, and it continues to evolve. And I love that about it. I love evolution. I love growth. And so I don't know if this answers your question, but you opened up a Pandora's box here. So yeah, so it's forced me to question a lot about myself. So that's what drag is. And I think that drag forces a lot of people maybe who aren't even involved in it to ask questions revolving around gender identity, sexuality, sexual preferences, sexual, I no joke, I've not been hit on by more quote unquote straight men in my entire life than until I started doing drag. And I think that raises a lot of questions. It raises a lot of questions for me, and I think it should hopefully raises a lot of questions for these men that are hitting on me,
There's also the possibility that you are transmitting confidence in drag, and people are picking up on that, and people are attracted to that.
That's very possible. Yeah. Well, see, now you've raised another question for me to ponder
on. That's what I love so much about art in general, right? Like, whether it's performance art or paint art. I don't know what else besides, I'm so steeped in performance art. That's the word I know. But just that idea of, like, I'm an improviser and I do musical improv also, and I'm a storyteller, and just I remember being on stage as an improviser and trying on different identities, but being able to do it in a safe way, because on improv, everything is yes. And what else, right? And so I just think there's something so magical about being able to safely try on different identities, and then that moment when it clicks of like, oh, this actually feels really good. And then what does that mean? And I love how you said that your journey is evolutionary, because at first I thought you said revolutionary, but you said evolutionary. Well, that, right. Yeah. But I think that's so so important to think about because so much of the work that I do, and Anthony, I'm wondering if you feel this way also, of um, people kind of think that once you kind of like grow up, you're done. And like the learning stops. And that's just not human nature. So I love that it sounds like you're like rooted and grounded in this idea of evolving. Anthony, sorry, either of you.
Please go ahead. Continue, please.
I mean, my experience of being an artist is using art as a way to find myself. So, it's an exploration. You don't really know what you're going to find. So it really is kind of evolutionary in its context. And performance, oh my God, performance is like one of the best ways to do that. You can be in the middle of performance and suddenly find parts of yourself and you're like, I didn't know that was there. It's very magical that way. And it's very grounding. And I feel like I get that from you as a fellow performer.
Thank you. It's over the last maybe year, 6 months or a year, that I've realized, I think specifically the conversation around gender identity is what made me realize, like, I realized, like, okay, you discovered something about yourself. And I think the mistake that a lot of people make is that when you discover something about yourself, you kind of like take that on, like, that is my identity and that's who I am. And that kind of blocks you from continuing to explore. So it's like what you said about, once you're a grown up, it stops. It doesn't stop. It stops when you die. Like, that's it. And if you stop evolving at 30 years old, not to sound like an asshole, but what are you living for? Like, what's the point? Like, keep going. There's so much more, and there's so much within each of us to learn about and to grow into. And again, specifically when it comes to gender identity, like, the language around gender identity is really fairly new. Like, as far as it being a part of like a pop culture or being open into the general population, the language is fairly new. So it's like a great resource that's there. Like, you hear people like, oh, I don't understand this gender queer, gender not, I don't understand what half of it means either. Like, I get confused about it too, but I'm not going to stop trying to figure out what it all means in all these different terms, because of that terminology and that language, I've been able to grow. I've been able to pinpoint who I am and how I feel and how this terminology relates to me. So it's all about growth. It's always about evolution. Always, 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 always. My drag is going to evolve as well, hopefully. Like, I hope everybody keeps evolving, because you know what? I don't know what, when people are like, people tell me, oh, people are scared to evolve or to change. I'm like, it's not scary. It's really fun. Like, it's explorative. It's just a good time. Like, it's exciting to me. I love it. I hope you guys do too. It sounds like you do.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
So this season of Joy and Resilience is specifically about queer Jews of color. You've been an engaging advocate for the place of Iranian Jews and Iranian-Jewish culture in an American Jewish conversation that tends to be very culturally Ashkenazi and institutionally rather straight-oriented. Though thanks to organizations like B'chol Lashon and Keshet, this is changing. What does a queer Jew of color identity mean for you? Like, what does it look like? What does it sound like?
I mean, I can only really answer that question coming from my own experience and me really stepping into my Iranianness and my Jewishness and unifying it with my queerness. And what it looks and feels like to me is, oftentimes there's two parts of it. One part of it is oftentimes it's an uphill battle, especially when we're talking about the non-queer world. Because, I mean, let me just say this, I've been leaning so much more into my Jewishness lately, just because you can't run from it. Like, it's who I am. It's not just a religion. We know that. So I can't like put it away. So I was like, well, let me learn more about this. And thanks to JQ International, which is an organization that I work with, I've been able to really step into it and see that there is a community of people that are queer and Jewish, and in my case, Iranian. So I've completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I don't even know. What was the question again?
What does queer Jew of color identity like mean for you?
Right. I mean, going back to resilience, it certainly means resilience because it is an uphill battle a lot of the time. So, okay, so this was my train of thought. So since I've been stepping into my Jewishness, I've been getting a lot of pushback, particularly from mostly Ashkenazi and mostly Orthodox Jewry. And so for me, it's become this thing of, whereas in the past, I would just kind of like step away and disassociate myself from it, from my Jewishness. Now it's become the opposite, where I'm leaning more into it and I'm like, okay, well, let me read what these people keep throwing these like quotes at me and passages from the Torah. Let me go do my own research and explore. What do these things mean? And I'm finding that this is why it's an uphill battle for me. I'm finding that this sort of Ashken normative interpretation of Torah that we've become accustomed to, which has become the norm, even in non-Ashkenazi communities, has not always been the norm. It's a very like sort of puritanical, religious version of what Judaism is. And Judaism predates the modern concept of religion, right? So there's that piece of it. And then there's the piece of it where I'm like, okay, so there are people who are literally spending their entire lives dedicated to the dissection, the breaking down of, and interpretation of Torah and halacha. So why is it that when it comes to these 2 or 3 passages that are pertaining to queer people, it's all of a sudden very black and white, there's no discussion, it's not allowed to be discussed, this is what it is, and you're forbidden. It's just not true. So what it's become for me is becoming this sort of uphill battle in terms of my non-whiteness and in terms of my queerness and in terms of my Jewishness, really finding my place and exploring what that place is and standing my ground. So I don't mind that it's an uphill battle, that's fine. It gets freaking exhausting sometimes when you have a 14-year-old on TikTok telling you you're an Avera. How do you explain, you want to go in on a 14-year-old, but you can't. I mean, you can, but I'm not going to go in on a 14-year-old.
Also, how much does a 14-year-old know about Averas?
Listen, they don't, but it's scary because they've been spoon-fed this version of Judaism that's been around for centuries now, that, it isn't what it always was. I certainly don't think it's what it always was. And I'm not trying to conflate Ashkenazi Judaism with whiteness, but it is the sort of normalized, certainly in Europe and in the US, the normalized version of what Judaism is. And I just don't get it, because when I see, and no shade to Orthodox people, I've known and loved many Orthodox people, but this rigidity when it comes to queerness is not okay. And it's become like sort of this personal a battle for me that I'm going to keep pushing through, because that 14-year-old who is so stingent on what isn't an Avera has been now brainwashed. And so I need to keep doing what I do. We all need to keep doing what we do so that other, 10, 12, 11, 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds don't get sort of stuck in this, that while they're still young and impressionable, can see that there are other routes and they're not so bad, we're not evil. So yeah, I went on a tangent and I'm sorry, but it's something that I'm very passionate about right now.
No, thank you. I always think of Judaism rather as Judaisms, right? There are many ways in which Judaism is expressed, and it belongs to us, and it's ours to interpret in the ways that we do that. And we need to be given space in order to create those interpretations. And we all do that in different ways.
I mean, isn't that like a main thing of Judaism though, right? Isn't that the whole point? Like you have choice and you have this idea of interpretation and study and dissection is a very, very like debate. These are very traditionally Jewish ideas, right? Jewish traits. So I refuse to believe that it just stops when it comes to queerness. Like, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't. And yeah. And as far as being a Jew of color, I mean, listen, this is this normalization of this Eurocentric and Eurocentric idea of Ashken normativity has been so embedded in me from such a young age that I didn't even know that as a Jew of color, I didn't even know there was other options. And this is just talking about the religious aspect of it. So it's a lot to unpack and it's a lot to get into, and it can be definitely an uphill battle, but I'm happy to be fighting it because there's a lot of us. In fact, there's, you know, there's a lot of us, and I wish that more and more of us, and I think that more and more of us are learning that we don't have to sit back and accept what's being fed to us as being this sort of whitewashed version of Judaism, because it isn't. I got into it with somebody on TikTok who I didn't actually know was only 17-year-old. The kid looked like he was 25, but he was an Ashkenazi, white functioning, Orthodox Jew who was on TikTok talking about that, justifying his questioning of an African-American Jew, that if they converted and how they converted, and this person got upset, and then his response was, well, it's justifiable because traditionally or historically, Jewish people, or what's the term? Semitic people aren't Black, was what he said. And my thing was, well, Semitic people aren't white, so where do you get off picking and choosing? Like, why is it okay for white passing and white functioning Ashkenazim to ask people of color, why is that acceptable? Like if Jews of color were to go into an Ashkenazi temple and start asking everybody if they've converted, which the truth of the matter is, throughout the history of Ashkenazi history, like there's been mass conversions and lots of conversions and lots of intermarriage. So it goes both ways. So why is it okay why is that the norm? Am I making sense here? Because I'm like...
You are very much making sense, and you're speaking to a certain kind of cultural hegemony that is in a lot of mainstream Jewish culture spaces. I mean, I always joke that people think that Maimonides was this person who lived in a shtetl in Poland. You know, he was a medieval Jewish commentator who lived in Egypt, you know. But, you know, when you hear Maimonides and you're hearing people talk about Maimonides, they're talking about him like he's this person who wore, you know, a giant fur hat and, you know, and lived, you know, in Eastern Europe. And the contents of what Judaism is and what Jewish culture is and what Jewish religion is are diverse. And it behooves us to remember that and to act from that, not to just know it, but to act it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's beautifully diverse. And, you know, learning about different, I remember as a kid being so otherized at the school that I went to because my family had different traditions when it came to Jewish tradition. I mean, things as simple as just the way the brachas are being said at Shabbat dinner. It's just, whereas now I'm standing back and I'm going, wait a minute. I come from Iranian Jewry. Like Iranian Jews have been in Persia, what is now Iran, since the 5th century BCE, like, and you're gonna make me feel otherwise? Like, my lineage is clearly there, so who are you to make me feel otherwise? Like, I'm not doing it to you. Why are you doing it to me? Yeah, we like to slap each other with spring onions on Passover. Like, yeah, it might look weird, but it's what we do, and it's probably what we've been doing for, I don't know, 2,000 plus years. So I don't know. It's the homogeneity of it. It shouldn't be there. It's not what it should be about. So, yeah, it pisses me off.
For good reason. For good reason. If anybody sees you walking towards them with a handful of green onions, they better watch out. So, given the state of the world over the past year, which has been a year like no other, it can feel really easy to sort of lean into, feelings of hopelessness. So I'm hoping that you can help us all out here by telling us what gives you hope.
I mean, I really don't have any hope. There is no. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh no!
I know. It's like,
don't you know COVID is a sign? No, what gives me hope is, well, I mean, on a small scale, like we have more and more vaccines being bought by the government. But I mean, on a grander scale, I think, and yes, it has been a difficult year for many, myself included. But I think first of all, in terms of COVID, like it's really forced a lot of people to take into consideration what's really important in life. I mean, we all at least know of someone who's related to someone or know someone firsthand who has either had COVID or passed away from COVID or complications from COVID. And it really forces you to look at life and take into consideration the fact that life can be taken away from you at any moment, like literally at any moment. A pandemic could take place where hundreds of thousands of people could die. So what are you going to do with your life, So it's twofold. It's like, yeah, that's sad and it's tragic, but on the other end, it kind of forces you to think about what it is that you want to do with your life, what it is that you want to say, what it is that you want to represent, who it is that you want to be, and really go for it full force. And I think we are seeing a little bit more of that. People having this realization that life is really fragile and you have to do what you want to do and say what you want to do and be who you feel you are. And seeing people do that makes me feel hopeful. And doing it myself makes me feel hopeful. And seeing people react to it makes me feel hopeful. And also on a grander scale, I think that consciousness, again, this is twofold. I think that consciousness is expanding so exponentially right now amongst at least half of the population. I think that we're seeing the further it goes in one end, like we also see it going further away in the other end, which would explain things like nearly half the population of the United States voting for somebody like Donald Trump. But to focus on the positive end of that, consciousness it's growing, it's expanding. Our understanding of humanity and of the complexities of humanity, and in terms of what I'm interested in the field that I work in sexuality and gender, this is all expanding. And I think it's so beautiful to see, and it's so wonderful to see people grow into this understanding. Like you're seeing now, 16-year-olds referring to their gender identity and being on their gender being on a spectrum. And it's so freaking cool. It's just so awesome. And that makes me hopeful. Seeing the youth be more understanding and have language that we didn't have when we were their age is incredible.
I also grew up during the 80s and 90s, and it feels amazing to me seeing how embodied people are in their identities and becoming themselves. Because like for me, it just didn't seem like there were that many examples that you could point to. You talk about seeing RuPaul. As an 8-year-old, I didn't have access to an underground drag scene. So like, how else was I going to experience, queerness or experience gayness? And now, people have so much access, not only to all of that, but to themselves. And it feels, to use your word, evolutionary and revolutionary.
It is evolutionary and revolutionary. I mean, it also, I want to say this to adults, like, watch what your children are doing, learn from them, don't write them off, because I see it so much within my own relatives with their 12-year-old kids, like they're just, don't write them off. They know so much and we can learn so much from them because they're growing up in a time and with a language and an understanding that we didn't have. I'm learning so much from teenagers and young adults. And it is evolutionary and it is revolutionary and it is amazing and beautiful. We live in a really great time.
Sorry, go ahead.
Aside from COVID, we live in a really great time.
Right. As a great diva once said, I believe that children are our future. So there it is.
And let them lead the way.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my understanding that we can actually follow your evolution on Instagram at the Empress Mizrahi. What will we find there if we go there?
You will find a lot of, I've been sort of, my whole thing is like, how do I unify the two things that I'm passionate about? And one is my gender identity / drag, and the other is activism in the sphere of being queer, Mizrahi, and Jewish. So what I've started to do is I've created a checkerboard on my Instagram, which I'm sure some people are like, oh my God, she's crazy. She's freaking OCD. But I'll post like a post with a quoted post with pages to it that are explaining whatever topic I'm talking about. Then after that, I'll post a fierce picture of myself just looking stunning, and then so on and so forth. So it's creating this kind of really cool grid. But you'll find information on there. Lately, it's my latest series of posts that I've been doing, a third part coming up, which will probably be the final part, is gender diversity in Judaism. So there's 2 posts on that so far, a third one to come. One of them specifically dealing with drag in Judaism. I don't know if you guys have heard of Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, but this rabbi,
oh yes,
obsessed with this man. Like, I want to marry him. I love him. He's amazing. He has opened my eyes up over the last few months so much, and he is a big part of the inspiration of what inspires me to take on the opposite, sort of to question the things that have been fed to us in terms of Judaism, in terms of the religious aspect. But anyway, so you will find a lot of those sorts of things on my Instagram, discussions on gender, discussions on Judaism, discussions on the queer perspective in Judaism. And then a lot of really, I hope, really cool pictures. So, yeah.
If seeing you, on Zoom is any indication, I think we're all in for a treat.
Thank you. I got my Hilton hair on, so thank you.
This has been such an amazing conversation. I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And I look forward to learning more about you and learning more about your work.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the both of you taking the time to speak with me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Joy and Resilience. To learn more about Keshet, a national organization that works for the full equality of all LGBTQ Jews and their families in Jewish life, you can visit them at www.keshetonline.org.
And to learn more about Bechol Lashon, an organization that strengthens Jewish identity by raising awareness about the ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity of Jewish identity and experience, please visit them at globaljews.org.